Welcome. Hope everybody staying dry. It was a little, it's still raining pretty heavily out there. It was raining pretty badly when I came in this morning, so I don't know. I personally dislike rain more than just anything when on a day that I'm trying to get into work. But just a personal foible of mine. All right, today we got exciting stuff. We're going to finally figure out what's going on with the Tallahassee bean counters, and I have confidence that everybody in this room has uncovered all the fraud that's taken place. You know, the exact economic impact, and every confidence in the world. So you're going to have identified all of the fraud. Everybody else confident with me? I was talking to Tyler before he came in. He was confident that he and his group identified all the fraud. Actually, I said, wouldn't it be a great joke if there was no fraud whatsoever? And he would say Dr. Barnes is the fraud then. Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our investigation questions. So we're talking about part 3, and we're going to be going to digital tools and data analysis in forensic investigations. So some basic stuff. The good news is a lot of these things you're going to be familiar with because you've done data analysis work in general speaking, whether that be financial data analysis or even accounting data analysis. There's not a whole lot of difference. It's just application of data analytics procedures in a forensic setting. So I had you do some research, went to a couple of resources and then linked back to it. So let's just go ahead and get into it. So according to the first resource, what is forensic data analysis? And then what are the stages in a forensic data analysis process? So Holden, I believe your group is the first one up, so I'm going to call on you. What did your group say on this one?
It's a branch of digital forensics, and it was defined as the analysis of large amounts of data for counters of criminal activity.
Right.
Stages are data acquisition, examination of data, analysis, and reporting.
Okay, good. So kind of just basic definition, just to go in a little bit more detail. Branch digital forensics defined as analysis large amount of data for patterns of criminal activity. So again, consistent with what we've already considered about data analysis, although this is specific because we're looking for anything that's an outlier for the distinct purpose of identifying criminal activity. Counter various crimes, including fraud, cybercrime, data theft, and more. Combines advanced analytic techniques with forensic accounting and investigative methods, which is kind of cool because that means that we can actually take information that we use from data analytics and incorporate that with our investigation, which, believe it or not, that was something that you've already done. You did some analysis for the first part of the RTBC activity. You identified anything that you thought was kind of unusual or outlier, and then you sat down and you talked to the people at RTB or at Tallahassee bean counters and said, I don't understand what's going on here. Why are there late payments? Why are there outdue receivables? Things along those lines. And depending on who you talk to, they either said, oh, there's a simple explanation for that, or I don't know, or they just stared at you. Okay, one of the three. A lot of ways that we can actually use that to be helpful. And as Holden identified, we're going to be talking about 4 stages: data acquisition, examination, data analysis, and reporting, which personally I think is a bit of a simplification, but we'll get into that a little bit more here in just a second. All right, moving on to question 2. First resource notes that many organizations are experiencing limitations of legacy systems. Based on what you've learned in previous courses, what types of limitations does the statement refer to, and speculate on how forensic data analysis can address such limitations? So this was a little bit more of a subjective question, and Lotus, your group was tasked with answering that question for the class. So what did your group come up with?
We said these limitations could include the use of outdated technology that hinders maintenance and upgrades. It may not have updated security measures in place. This can be addressed by analyzing data from multiple legacy sources and helping to ensure the data is stored securely and accurately in compliance with regulations.
Yes, so very good identification. We talked about infrastructure technology is many decades old. I'm looking at the IRS when I say that, okay? But we talked about that before, about outdated systems. They may not be able to be updated with conventional protocols. Specifically, if we're talking about this day and age where cybersecurity is such a big issue and cybercrime is kind of running rampant, having an old system that cannot be updated with good antivirus software, good security protocols, firewalls, just very basic procedures that we would expect in most systems. If we have these legacy systems that cannot be adapted to that, then they're going to be very vulnerable. Something if we can even go back even further that I talked about, and this is specifically relevant to forensic data analysis, the integrity of the data is certainly problematic with respect to security, but what about just the nature of the data itself? So everybody remember back in AIS, we talked about conventional processing systems versus database technology. Now, that seems like a kind of a dream back then. We said that conventional processing systems, they don't exist anymore. At least that's our argument, is that we don't have conventional processing systems. But for really, really old companies that have not updated their systems in a long time, or companies that have actually just kind of built upon existing systems, the ability to query databases may kind of be a fond thing that they just can't do. So forensic data analysis could actually be beneficial in that we could pull data and we could treat it like a database processing system as opposed to being a conventional processing system. So certainly some advantages with newer technologies that we can actually update. Now, again, that sounds like something that would not occur in this day and age. I am looking back 20 years. This is something I did pretty regularly back when I did forensic data analysis, is to pull old database system information and put it into new formats. So it's still probably within the realm of possibility, but certainly the security precautions are going to take place front and center, particularly as they relate to whether or not they can actually incorporate modern cybersecurity protocol. All right, question number 3. Second resource identifies 5 steps in digital forensics. What are they, and how do these steps align to the stages from question 1? All right, so Dottie, what are the 5 steps and how do they align?
So, these are the 5 steps for identification, preservation, analysis, documentation, and presentation. And they line up pretty well, except for those 5 steps have more of an emphasis on the preservation of data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they align pretty closely, but we don't actually have preservation listed as an item because these items kind of, the items that are listed in the first resource kind of incorporates the concepts of preservation already. All right. And so data acquisition, examination, analysis, reporting incorporate the concepts of preservation. This is more kind of a general guideline to approach of how we would conduct a digital forensic investigation. These are more along the lines of what are some concerns of what we'd have with respect to the organization of data for a forensic analysis. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I will say that the preservation step, that number 2 step that we had listed there, that's going to be an extremely relevant step, especially as we start talking about different programs that we could use for analysis. Something that we have to be very, very aware of in this day and age, simply because the data itself needs to be kept in a manner that it can actually be secure for the analysis. All right. Question number 4. First resources identify several AI tools that can improve forensic data analysis process. What are some ways that AI tool use might represent an improvement over traditional forensic data analysis? Why it might be less effective than traditional methods? So I want to take this in pieces. I want to actually take one group and answer the first question and then another group answer the second question. So Sydney, what are some ways that AI could be better? Yeah, so certainly the speed, the volume of data that it can handle, that's going to be a big benefit. If we talk about what a computer can do versus a human being can do, computers are generally going to be superior in that regard. Also, if we identify specific patterns that we're looking for, if we know exactly what the pattern is supposed to be that we're looking for, then a computerized tool, an AI tool, is going to be able to identify those patterns much more effectively than a human being would. So yeah, that's going to be a general benefit of using any computerized tool, specifically AI tools that are going to be trained and can actually expand beyond just the initial parameters of that. So yeah, I gave that was a pretty thorough analysis of that. Kyle, I'm giving you a little bit more of a more challenging question then. What is going to be the why might tools be less effective than traditional methods?
We said that AI tools can take outside resources and to help, which could be a benefit over a traditional method, but we also see that being a detriment. So if whatever data it's trained on is wrong, and it's pulling that in, whatever it's doing is also wrong, and then AI tends to be biased and focuses on a singular issue, even if that's not the main issue you want to look at.
Right. So the AI tool, it really depends on the nature of the AI tool, but AI tools definitely have existing biases because of the algorithms on which they're trained. And getting rid of those biases can really be problematic. It could be something as simple as just trying to actually get AI to do something that it's not trained to do. There's the old example of why AI tools can't actually create a picture of a cup of wine that is full. All right. And if you think about it, almost all of the art of pictures of cups of wine out there are half full, because that's how wine snobs drink wine. They don't fill the cup the entire way full. They fill half full. So there's actually been a programmed bias into the artwork which is trained on. Now, obviously, artwork is different from data analysis, but the same concept applies. If there are existing biases in the data algorithm and the algorithm which the data is trained, then those biases are going to bleed over. What happens when the biases actually relate to the question that we're trying to answer? When the biases are trying to overlap or override any of the questions or the patterns that we're trying to identify. So we say, look for this pattern, and the AI tool legitimately cannot recognize the pattern because it has no experience with the pattern. It's not going to be able to provide robust results. Also, it's not really going to be adaptive to new patterns and new circumstances. As Sydney pointed out, if we're looking for a very, very specific pattern that's recurring and is going to be fairly self-contained, the AI tool is going to be much more effective than a human being in identifying that. But what if we don't exactly know what the pattern is we're looking for? We have a general guideline, or if we're looking for something that's unusual but not ever been expanded on before, being identified before. How effective is the AI tool going to be in that regard? And the answer is not at all. All right, they're not going to be effective at all. Whereas a human being is going to be more effective, at least in that regard, simply because they can use critical thinking and professional judgment in the analysis of the results. So as we can start to move forward, we know that AI tools are going to be beneficial to our use in this area as well as many other areas. But it's important to note that it's not going to replace those critical examination of evidence that we've come to know and love. And one of the big reasons why you're going to be marketable here in a few months and why everybody's going to be getting jobs is that AI tool is not going to replace you. The AI tools are just going to supplement the work that you're already doing. So this was kind of my boost to you saying, hey, you're not going to lose your job to AI tools, at least not yet. Okay. Who knows what the future holds? Okay. But yeah, if that's the case, then at least you've got the skills to become white collar criminals. So you know that's always an option ahead of you. But we'll get into that. All right. So referring back to the 6 steps in conducting a financial fraud investigation, I think I've got that. Can look at that link. Let's take a look at. Oh, doggone it! I meant to look at the link, but I meant to open it in that tab. Let's try this again. Dr. Barnes and his inability to work with new technologies. All right, 6 steps of financial fraud investigation. So consultation, examination, identification, background, asset discovery, and legal action. Everybody remember that? Remember to love that? Okay. I was like, no, Dr. Barnes, that was several weeks ago. We've forgotten that. Okay. And that's fair. Okay. That's a fair statement. So referring back to that from week 7, how do these steps differ from those we identified in question number 3? And assume that you're conducting a financial fraud investigation that involves forensic data analysis. Which set of steps would you use in your investigation? So, AJ, how do these steps differ?
We said that the steps in question 3 are more data specific, while the week 7 steps are like an investigation as a whole.
Yeah, so if we're talking about investigation as a whole, definitely we want to use the steps that we identified several weeks ago. We're talking about forensic data analysis, then we want to be very, very specific that we're going to follow the steps and the protocols that are required in data analysis. Now, can we say that both series of steps are procedural? What do you guys think? Do you have an opinion on the matter? Says yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Let's just go to poll, and you're gonna have to answer one of the questions. How many think that these are both procedural sets of steps? Okay, I'm disappointed everybody didn't raise their hands immediately because they're all procedural. Okay, they're all procedural. If that's the case, that leads us to a bit of a question. If these are both procedural series of steps, which one do we use in an investigation? So AJ, I'm gonna stick with you on this one.
We said week 7 steps because question 3 steps could be included in the examination phase of the week 7. So we would kind of use them both.
So you said week 7, but then you said both.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a cop out right there. I think that's fair. I copped out the same thing too. I said exactly the same thing. I said, yeah, generally speaking, we'd have to use both. The sets of data analysis steps would be incorporated into the full investigation steps. So great minds think alike, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of the thing we have to note is just because it's procedural doesn't necessarily mean that we can't incorporate new procedures into existing protocols. So that's kind of the goal that I wanted you to identify in this particular scenario, is saying that these are all trying to identify specific patterns in an investigation, but one is going to be more focused on another in a specific area of the investigation. So that's what you have to identify. You can't really get rid of one, but you can't really focus entirely on one or the other. All right, first resource states that forensic data analysis frequently combines structured and unstructured data. What is the difference between these two? Back to you, Holden. What's structured and unstructured data?
We said structured data is organized and stored in databases or spreadsheets or statements, while unstructured is just information in various forms.
Yes, okay, so we talk about structured data. Generally, we think about things that can go into Word, things that can go into Excel, data that we can analyze very, very easily. We have tools that pre-exist that actually perform that analysis for us. And so I think if we're going to be honest, structured data is the type of data that we'd like to have almost all the time because it's very easy to manipulate, it's very easy to analyze, it's very easy to store. Unstructured data is data that doesn't fit in those parameters, is basically everything else. We could say images, we could say audio files, we could say video files. Those could all be forms of unstructured data. Does that mean that they are not data? Obviously, they can actually be data, which means they can be disseminated to information for value. But we're not exactly sure how we go about doing that. How do we actually identify what data is relevant and what can be converted to useful information? There's certainly going to be data that's going to be shared upon within this room, and we could actually say what is going to be value data. We don't know because we don't have a dissemination mechanism. But the goal is going to be to find some way to disseminate this information, this detail, so that it can actually be eventually transitioned into some sort of value. All right, so how do these concepts relate to big data? And Holden, you did such a great job. We're going to stick with you on this question.
You said big data encompasses both types and requires analytical tools and skills to process them effectively.
All right, so we have to know that big data is going to necessarily include some sort of analysis over unstructured data. Could big data exist without unstructured data? What do you guys think? Could we say big data and just only think about structured data? I think it'd be very challenging to come up with, when we talk about big data, remember the 5 V's, I don't remember if I remember all the time. So volume, velocity, veracity, value, and I'm missing one. I don't remember what it is. This is not an AIS course, so I'm not going to test you on that. But yeah, the 5 V's of big data, and so almost all of those are going to be ones that are going to be very, very high in content. And so when we talk about the nature of data, oh, I think I said variety. I didn't say variety. It's going to vary in content, which I was naturally going to say. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of different ways that we can actually present data. Not all of that is going to be something that's just easy to conceptualize. So big data by definition cannot actually be just limited to structured data. Unstructured data is important. So if we have some sort of valuation mechanisms for big data, that's going to actually provide additional value for the detail that we can analyze. Now, how does this relate to forensic investigation? Well, can we say that forensic investigation is going to be solely centered on structured data? I don't think so. I think that would be nice. It would be wonderful if we could actually just do forensic analysis over structured data, but there's going to be information that we look at out there that's going to come from unstructured data. That's going to be derived from unstructured data. I'll honestly see this in TV shows. We see this TV shows and movies. You know, somebody's out there doing a stakeout and they've got that big microphone with like a big satellite dish on it, which you got to imagine that somebody's going to look out. So there's a car with a satellite dish on it. That's weird. Okay. But they put that out. It's like a microphone that can pick up noises, and they record it and they say this recording can be used in a court of law. That's unstructured data. And so we can't really say that that's something that's analyzed, but it apparently has some sort of informational value, especially when the criminal says, yeah, I killed that man, so that when they admit to it, says, all right, this is where we convert the data to information right there. They don't ever say that in the movies, but that's actually what's happening, is they'll convert it to something of value. All right. So we do know that this has to be relevant to not just criminal investigation, but forensic investigation as well. All right. ACCT Fraud Examiner's Manual identifies 3 testing techniques for forensic data analysis: ad hoc testing, repetitive testing, and continuous testing, which, by the way, you didn't need to have the ACCT Fraud Examiner's Manual, but it made things much easier to be able to do this. So briefly explain the differences between these testing techniques. Lotus, what'd your group say on this one?
Ad hoc testing is one use point analysis for a specific project, like fraud investigation. Repetitive is repeatable, predefined, and automated procedure performed on similar data on a scheduled basis. And continuous testing is constant monitoring and testing, often directly embedded directly into the production system, focusing on transactions or areas that pose strong risks when preventative controls are deemed either not possible or ineffective.
Good. All right. So just as a reiteration, we talked about ad hoc testing. That's basically saying, all right, we're going to test at a single point in time. We're going to look at one piece or a defined set of pieces of information. This is going to be an example of a singular fraud investigation. So ad hoc testing is kind of what we traditionally think of when we say, what is a fraud investigation? Your return of the Tallahassee Beehive Hunters case, that's a ad hoc test or series of ad hoc tests, a series of ad hoc tests that are involved in investigation. Okay. Repetitive testing, as Lotus had identified, predefined, repeatable procedures over similar data on a scheduled basis. We generally use those in process areas with high fraud risk. So if we're talking about how we would incorporate this into traditional analysis, we would say like revenue and purchasing processes would probably be very relevant to have repetitive testing here. This is something that the internal auditors probably would incorporate into their evaluation of the organization's procedures and operational protocols. And then continuous testing is constant data monitoring. It's usually the transaction level where preventive controls are less effective or practical. So we've talked about preventive controls, and what do we think about preventive controls as the people in this room? How many people are fans of preventive controls? Everybody should be fans of preventive controls because we don't want fraud to occur in the first place. But we know that preventive controls are not infallible. Okay. First of all, it's just easy to bypass those controls through certain inherent limitations. But secondly, even if preventive controls are good, they may not be perfect. Some areas we may not have the ability to implement proper preventive controls. I'm using alliteration unintentionally. But if we have constant testing, we can actually mitigate that through detective and corrective mechanisms that we could actually incorporate there. So this is kind of a redundant test to make sure that we note that while these preventive controls would be wonderful to make sure that nothing bad ever happens, that bad things will happen, and we want to make sure that we can stop those. Okay, question number 8. The ACCT Fraud Examiner's Manual contains a special section that discusses the challenges in digital forensics related to cloud computing. Speculated why digital forensics over cloud assets might be more difficult than traditional forensic data analysis. Dottie, what's your group say about cloud computing?
So we said that we some issues with investigating cloud assets include like lack of frameworks and specialist tools, lack of accessibility, lack of data control, lack of knowledge, jurisdiction of storage, electronic discovery, preserving chain of custody and resource sharing. And we said that generally these issues come from the fact that cloud assets are not controlled or located within the company itself.
Good. Yeah. So all the reasons given boil down to kind of the challenges surrounding data access and protocols surrounding those. Data access rights and control protocols, they tend to be more challenging to enforce on cloud data. All right. And we note this because we've talked about cloud data in other classes or in other courses. We've talked about the challenges associated with that and enforcing kind of the rights and restrictions upon that. It's important to note that the constant sharing of cloud resources may actually create some issues with maintaining an effective audit trail. Now, I know that we're very concerned as forensic analysts to be able to understand what path we're going to be able to follow. If we have cloud resources, that path may not be immediately apparent, which is kind of why the audit trail is so important. Remember, we talked just in the previous question about detective and corrective mechanisms. In order to be able to detect and correct a problem, you need to know what the problem is, what is the severity of the problem, and then what is the proper path to fix the problem. Cloud resources don't necessarily always provide that. Now, we are seeing a shift to where cloud resources are actually providing better dissemination of information, a better path associated with that. It's maybe something as simple as like having a spreadsheet open in Google Sheets and saying, I know exactly what the change log looks like. If we have something like that, then the cloud mechanisms may be a little bit more appropriate for use. But that's not going to be true for all cloud mechanisms, particularly those that are shared across very large amounts of individuals. All right, question number 9. At this point in your academic careers, you should have quite a bit of experience with a variety of data analysis tools. Can we say that that's correct? Does everybody feel pretty good about their experience in that? All right. It says, I know Excel, Dr. Barnes. All right. Hopefully you know something more in Excel. I think, is everybody in this room taking Dr. Lingwell's class right now? Okay. How's that going? All right, good. All right. I've heard like was it like 3 homework assignments a week or 2 homework assignments a week? Three. Okay. So you're learning, and some of these tools that you've actually worked with. Let's go back to the case of the disappearing printer ink from our assignment in week 2. You've been hired to complete a forensic data analysis over the fraud in Las Vegas Valley Water District. So this is pretty open-ended here. This is pretty open-ended. I want you to provide an example of a query you would run, assuming that you perform the analysis using and then we're talking about all different ones, okay? So let's go into a little bit of depth here. I'm going to probably ask for a few of these for each of these. So general analytics tool, what kind of query would you run to for the Las Vegas Valley District Fund. So remember, that was the one where the supervisor was buying ridiculous amounts of printer ink and selling it on the secondary market. Okay. So you've been assigned to the forensic investigator to understand the scope of it. How would you actually do your data analysis if you're using a tool like Excel? Okay. So we'll start with Sydney. Okay, so we actually list out all the accounts and try to see which ones are going to have higher trends over time. Okay. Kyle, what'd you say? Or your group say?
We do like a pivot table or a pivot chart to find out like when our printer ink and printer available purchasing.
Did you bring pivot table into my class, even though it's a Dr. Caden thing? Actually, my answer says pivot table too. So yeah. All right. AJ, what'd your group say?
We said totaling purchases, receivables, making sure there isn't any discrepancies in the balance bearing. And the basic visualizations showing how much ink was bought each month and comparing how much.
Okay, that's pretty good. I think that those are all general tools. We can all easily perform on those. Let's move on to large data set and analytics tools and see if there's some things that we could do before. By the way, did everybody know that I can't use IDEA in audit anymore because the system doesn't support it? Yeah. Isn't that sad? Is everybody just kind of like, yeah, the people who came after us, they're going to be missing out because they won't be able to use IDEA. Isn't it a shame that I can't actually use IDEA in any of these classes as well? Everybody's just like, yeah, it's terrible, Dr. Barnes. I'm gonna miss it. And you liars. All right. So large data set analytic tools, which is IDEA and Alteryx, all those wonderful tools that we've used before. All right. What would be an example of the something we could use for that? Holden.
We said to find fictitious vendors, we use a find and replace tool to cross-reference vendor payments records with the employee list or vendor list database.
Okay, good. Lotus.
Sorry, I've got space now.
What is an example of a query we could use using a large data analytics tool?
We said we can use it to clean the data.
Okay, we would definitely use it to clean the data. That's something that large data analytics tools help out. And then Dottie, what'd your group say?
So you said you can like filter shipping transactions to only the following vendor.
Right, so definitely have some filter tools associated with that. I actually used a kind of a filter mechanism as well, because I will say the large data set tools are very good with their filtering tools. You could do the same thing in a general analysis tool, but the filtering tends to be a little bit more distinct, and you can identify individual transactions much more effectively. But I said high frequency and repeating transactions would be something you could identify very easily in a large data analysis tool. All right, then I want to you guys to expand your minds on this one, see what you came up with. So statistical analysis tools. You had some RStudio and Python experience recently, haven't you? Okay. So this one was pretty basic. I don't consider myself an expert in statistical analysis tools, but I wanted to see what you come up with. Sydney, what did your group say? Good. Kyle?
We said to run a regression analysis to see how much ink should be used for the number of days, the number of employees using it, the number of papers printed, and then compare that to actual.
Yeah, and that was kind of something I actually identified too. I said if we ran a regression on location, season user amount and any of their relevant variables, we would actually identify what the prediction amount should be for printer ink usage at a point in time, and anything that that's outside of that range would be something that would be a variable of interest. All right, finally, data visualization tools. So Tableau and Power BI. You guys are working with Tableau now, right? Aren't you? Okay, how are you enjoying that? Love it. All right, fantastic. That's generally what I hear is better than R, better than Python, all those tools, but Tableau is much easier to use. The actual projects that he does for the end of the semester things, he shares those with us occasionally, and it's kind of cool some of the things that people come up with. I've already heard some of the people in this class sharing their projects, and I'm very interested to see what they come up with. But data visualization, what would be an example of we could do for data visualization? AJ, what'd your group come up with?
You said bar charts and histograms and printer ink.
Yeah, bar charts and histograms and printer ink. Okay, so actually I'm right there with you. I actually had a specialized form of histogram. Have you all talked about in your classes something called Bedford's Law? So we actually were able to used to do that in IDEA. I don't think we ever did an IDEA, but it was a tool that you use in IDEA, but it's something you generate a visualization. So there was actually an engineer from General Electric, his name is Frank Benford. And this is back in, I think in 1950s, I don't remember the exact date, but he was using a logbook and he noticed that the pages on the logbook for the digits 1 and 2 were far more worn than the pages that were like the later digits. And so he started doing analysis of randomized data and found that in randomized data sets with numeric values, that the numbers 1 and 2 occur more frequently as the leading numbers than the other numbers. In fact, 1 is used something around 20% of the time as opposed to other ones, whereas 9 is used only something like 5% of the time. So kind of an interesting trend. Later on, they found Benford analysis can be run on 2-digit analysis as well. And basically, as AJ pointed out, it's a form of a histogram showing occurrence and frequency of digits in randomized data. So if you're ever curious about a forensic analysis and you want to go up and really impress somebody, say, you know, we should run a forensic analysis over the amount field, or sorry, forensic analysis of the amount fields using a Benford analysis. And they'll say, wow, that's really cool. I think you should do that. And then you're going to be stuck because you've never run a Benford analysis before. But it's actually pretty easy. It's actually pretty easy. All right, that wraps that up. Let's go ahead and get started on the quiz, and then we're going to talk about the RTBC. All right, we've made it, everyone. We're here to the end of the return of the Tallahassee bean counters. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about it. So there were 4 questions I asked you to answer. Who committed the fraud? How was the fraud committed? The economic impact of the fraud to the TBC and the financial benefit of suspects received from committing the crime. So before we get into the details on that, what is the very first step to any forensic investigation? It actually alludes to this into the case. It says, what are some things that you need to identify? Obviously, you need to identify information of interest, but the very first thing we want to talk about is what is the reason the fraud occurs? So one of the very first things you learned about forensics, not in this course, we talked about it, we've alluded to it many times in this course, but you learned about it back in probably 367. So learned about 3 sides of the fraud triangle, okay? Now refresh my memory. What are the 3 sides of the fraud triangle again? Pressure, opportunity, rationalization. Good. Okay. So let's go ahead and think about which of the characters in this situation might have had pressure, opportunity, rationalization. Now, pressure is probably a pretty easy one. We have a few of the usual suspects that we can say probably there's some pressures listed here. All right. So who's kind of the most obvious person when we talk about pressure in this particular case? What's up, Ben Hill? Everybody looked at Ben Hill and said, yeah, that guy's got some pressures. He's got those alimony payments that's going on. So Ben Hill was our fraudster in the original case. Now you'll notice this is a different scenario. It's like an alternate universe where the Tallahassee bean counters, they never had a fraud occur in that first place. So Ben Hill is still around, driving his, what did he call that car? The chick magnet. Boy, that's just vulgar. All right. Yeah. You can tell this was written in the early 2000s, but yeah. Ben Hill kind of wanting his disco suits and trying to live his lifestyle, and had 2 ex-wives, both paying both alimony, has lost everything and is not getting paid very much. So yeah, definitely some pressure there. Have we any other pressures that we can identify that are readily available here? All right, so there's a very interesting one. Okay, so this actually relates to Ben Hill, but also there were going to be who else is that applicable to? So we have the new facility that's being built, and they're trying to take a loan out on the new facility. And so one of the criteria is that if the loan meets certain parameters, that certain individuals will receive a bonus. Okay. So one of the overarching goals in this particular case is that they wanted to actually achieve a certain profit level so the people can get a bonus. And Ben Hill's one of those individuals. So, okay, we're leaning into Ben Hill now. Ben Hill may be our suspect again. Okay. Is there anybody else that might be relevant in that scenario? Is anybody else receiving a bonus? Is what I'm asking. Phil, yes. Phil is also going to receive a bonus. Can we consider that to be a pressure there? So if I said, all right, if you score really well in the next exam, I'm going to give you $35,000. Okay. Would you consider that a pressure to do well in the next quiz? Yeah, everybody like, I cannot miss a single point in the next quiz. I really need a 35. By the way, that's not an offer. Okay. That's not an offer. Okay. But I do want to make sure that everybody notes that would actually create a lot of pressure on you. And I would not do that because I don't want to make an undue pressure on anybody in this classroom. It's why I don't give you $35,000 a piece. Okay. No pressure on anybody. Yeah. No other reason than that. No other reason than that. So yeah, certainly a pressure going on there. All right. Any other pressures we can identify? Those are kind of the most readily apparent ones that are kind of listed in the case. So the cast of characters are kind of listed there. Now we'll drill down a little bit more. There may be some more pressures that are not immediately obvious, but become a little bit more apparent to do some drilling down. What about opportunities here? Opportunities. So there's definitely some opportunities associated with this loan issue. Okay, some loan issues. So that would be kind of one of those things that we pick up on. Is we know that there's a pressure associated with receiving that bonus, and this might be an area where the people will fudge the numbers. All right. So who do we think is the best position to actually take advantage of this particular scenario? Is it Ben? Does Ben have any opportunity related to the revenue recognition process? No, Ben has no opportunity in this area whatsoever. Okay. That's something that if you did a little bit of drilling down and say, okay, how does Ben related to reporting and revenue? You could find he has no authorization responsibility there whatsoever. So what do we know about the fraud triangle? 3 areas of the fraud triangle. Okay. If we cut off one of those areas of the fraud triangle, because can the fraud still exist? So if we eliminate opportunity, can fraud take place? No. Okay. All right. So if Ben has no opportunity to commit the fraud, can Ben be the fraudster? At least not with a fraud in this area. Okay. Now that's not with counting there may be fraud in other areas. Okay. But for this particular fraud, Ben is not going to be it's not a possibility. What about Phil? Does Phil have a control over the reporting in this area? To some degree, yes, he's got control. What else? Also, with respect to Phil, how much oversight would you say that Phil has with respect to his job? Okay, because he's got his boss, who's the owner, who Franklin Kennedy's the owner, and Franklin reviews the financial statements on a regular basis, right? No, he does not. He does not. Is that a problem? Yes, because if there is a fraud, then he can get away with it without anybody knowing about it. Unfortunately, somebody said, Franklin, you need to investigate and hire forensics, and we hired the best forensics professionals Truman State has to offer. So yeah, we're going to investigate that. So there's definitely some opportunity that we consider right there. Now, rationalization is a little bit more subtle, but we could talk about anybody could rationalize given enough means to do so. But definitely we can talk about pressure and opportunity and going into detail. So that's going to be our starting point. All right. So can we say that revenue recognition might be one of those areas that we want to be very, very careful about? All right. Yeah, that's probably a pretty big one. It's probably a pretty big one that we want to focus on. All right. So can we say that that's probably one of the areas we want to investigate for fraud? Yes. All right. Anything else just from reading the case itself? And this is before you got to investigation. Anything you're just kind of like, this is kind of weird. I'm not sure what's going on here. This might be an area you want to investigate a little bit further. So anything else that jumped out? So there's an individual named Julie in the case. Did anybody identify her as a person of interest? Was it mostly just because of nepotism? Is that why you all said, yeah, okay, it's Phil's niece, okay? She might be up to shenanigans. Julie seems pretty smart. She seems pretty sharp. She's trying to go to school, trying to make better herself, okay? But Julie has volunteered to do stuff that her predecessors our current people don't want to do. So she basically has come in and said, yeah, you know what? People don't want to handle the concessions inventory. I'm going to take it over. Okay. I'm taking over the concession inventory. And Michelle's like, yeah, go to town. This is handling collection accounts receivable. I'm going to take it over. Okay. I'm going to take it over. All right. So she's just a go-getter, right? There's no motivation there. She's just a go-getter, right? All right. So let's think about this. She took over accounts receivable. I believe that was from Michelle. She took that over from. Okay. Is it possible, just speculating, okay? Everybody here is a forensic expert, okay? Is it possible that revenue could be overstated by misstating accounts receivable? Is that a possibility? How many of you all are thinking that's a possibility that could occur in reality? That's never happened before. Companies have never booked fictitious receivables to overstate their revenues. Yeah, it's not an earnings scheme that happens all the time. Yeah, it happens all the time. Yeah, so it's certainly a possibility. And if Phil's niece is on top of this, who's going to be her immediate supervisor? Phil. And we know that Phil is already a person of interest. Okay. Also, there's some stuff going on concessions like the inventory. And fortunately, Holly is still on the case. Holly still kind of produces her own inventory counts. But what do we know about inventory from a fraud perspective? What do we know about inventory? Is it a highly liquid asset? Is it susceptible to misappropriation? Yes. Okay. So that's something we want to be considered as well. All right. Any other areas of interest? Any other individuals that might have come up in the beginning of from the beginning of the case? So there was one other thing that I want to kind of bring to attention, okay? So they're got the new facility that's coming up, okay, and there's got a kind of guiding the whole revenue recognition that's happening. What do we know about the bid process that happened with the construction or the construction of the new facility? It was a little bit suspicious. It was won by a group by Larkin Construction. What order were they in the bid process? Dead last. They kind of swooped in at the very end and won the process. Does that seem a little bit suspicious? We should always have suspicion as forensic auditors. Again, it kind of goes back to that professional skepticism idea as auditors and accountants. We want to be skeptical and we'll be like, that's kind of strange. Somebody at the very last minute came in and made a bid that won. So that's something might investigate as well. All right. So let's just go ahead and get into detail. What do you guys think? How many frauds do we have? Was there fraud with the revenue recognition process? How many people think yes? There was fraud with the revenue recognition process. Okay, all right. So we got one, all right. Is there fraud going on with inventory? With the inventory? Yes, there's definitely fraud going on with inventory, okay? The concessions theft, okay? Is there a fraud going on with concessions bid rigging? Yes, okay, so we have three. Are there any others? There is one more going on. This one was not necessarily obvious given the case, but if you did a little bit of digging, it came up. What's the fourth one?
Fix it.
Freddie Fix It. Freddie Fix It. Yeah, coming in and doing shoddy maintenance work. Okay. Yeah. So who are the fraudsters in this particular scenario? So who's responsible for the revenue recognition fraud? Primarily Phil, can we say? Okay. Because we know that he's pretty much the only one who's in a position to do so. Did he have any assistance? A little bit of help from Julie. We can actually prove that here in just a second. Okay. What about the maintenance? What do we know about Freddie Fix It? Freddie Fix It is just a friendly old guy that comes in off the street and does fix it stuff. And apparently he was hired to do bad work. What's the deal with? Oh, Phil's brother-in-law. Phil's brother-in-law. Ooh, okay. The plot thickens. All right. The plot thickens. Okay. Concessions theft. Who's responsible for that? That's Julie. Julie is actually responsible for that. Okay. And the construction bid rigging. Okay. Who's responsible for that? Bill. Okay. So let's go into detail about how each of these committed, and we're going to go through the next three questions for each of these scenarios. Okay. So how was the fraud committed for the revenue recognition fraud? So what did we say earlier? So we talked about a little bit of suspicion with Julie in her new position. What was one of her new responsibilities? Accounts receivable. Okay. What was she doing? She was booking fictitious accounts receivable where? Yeah, the group tickets. Like the groups are actually on the one group that allows for accounts receivable. They can actually buy purchase on credit, and so they put the tickets in will call. There were a lot of tickets that were never picked up. All right, a lot of these organizations that were never picked up. Okay, so yeah, certainly problematic. How big was this particular revenue recognition fraud? Was it minor? Only like maybe one or two groups every now and then? $100,000. Woo! What we got here? Look at all these groups that were made up. Whoa! $110,448. Oh my gosh, that's quite a financial impact right there. Okay, so we've got revenue overstated by $110,448. Is that the entirety of the economic impact? No. What else do we have to take into account? The bonuses were paid based on the performance of this. This actually escalated the revenue, so the bonuses were inappropriately paid. Phil was deliberately. Ben actually got a new car because he was paid additional as well, just incidental benefits. So Ben, even though they're not the villain in this one, still got a little bit of benefit of the fraud. So go Ben. It's good to be the king, I guess. Yeah. So is there anything else that we need to actually consider as far as the revenue recognition, appropriate revenue recognition? So we've got the overstatement of revenue. We've actually got the bonuses that were paid out inappropriately. Is there anything else? So I'm looking at the tax people. What do we know about taxes? Are taxes relevant here? Yeah, there's revenue. There's the sales tax based on the revenue recognition. It's 5% of revenues that are generated. So if they overstated revenue by 110,000, then 5% of that would have also gone to taxes that were going to be paid as well. So there's actually that effect as well. So I want you to remember, Dr. Barnes talked about taxes in this class. He talked about taxes again. Yeah. So the tax effect is there, okay? So we quantify that pretty heavily. I don't have the exact number on here, but it's basically, it's around the area of 160,000 all total effect for that revenue recognition. All right, so that's good, but what was our fourth question? The financial benefit, okay? The financial benefit. Who had by financial benefit from this particular fraud? I mean, no, obviously Ben got his new chick magnet because of it, but yeah. What other parties had financial benefit? He was not the fraudster, so we're not going to blame him. We're just going to say, give us back your car because you didn't deserve that money. Nobody wants that car. So who financially benefited from the fraud? Phil, okay. Phil, okay. So we know Phil did because of the bonus that he was paid. He was an appropriate bonus, so that's an easy quantifiable one. The bonus he was paid was $34,704, and that's why I said $35,000 earlier. Paid $34,000. The ranges of the bonus could actually have been much lower to non-existent. He could have not gotten a bonus at all. So we're going to say that that full 34,000 is going to be a financial amount. Did anybody else benefit as a result of this? So how many people got bank records? Julie benefited as well. Julie got a benefit. Julie got a payment of $10,000 from our Uncle Phil right at the date that the bonuses were paid. Okay. Do you think that was happenstance? Probably not. We don't believe in coincidences in this class. Okay. So we've got benefit for the revenue recognition fraud for both Phil and Julie. Julie's was indirect because it was paid by Phil. All right, let's go talk about Freddie Fix-It. Freddie Fix-It. So how could we actually approach and make sure that because Freddie's actually going out and doing the work, right? In some instances, yes. In some instances, no. Like the painting of the facilities, he was hired to do that and was paid $2,000 and never did anything. Okay. But Freddie was supposed to be doing the work. So what's the deal with Freddie? What's going on? So Freddie actually has his own Fix-It shop. So it sounds like a legitimate business, right? You guys had to sit down with Freddie. I heard some interesting conversations going on with Freddie. Okay. Matt really got into the conversations with Freddie. Okay. Hey, did you give him like a southern accent, like he was from Arkansas or something like that? Yeah. Okay, well, it's all good. It's all good. At least you got into it. So yeah, Freddie Fix-It, just a good old boy. What does he like to do? He likes to do some work and then lounge around and watch baseball because he's a big baseball fan. But did anybody kind of do a little digging into his background? He's a brother-in-law of Phil. What do we know about Phil? What's a little bit about Phil's background? What's that? He enjoys nepotism. Okay, so he's very nepotism in a lot of nepotism in his life. Okay, he definitely helps out people that are related to him. But what was Phil's background? So former Major League Baseball player. Anybody follow Major League Baseball in this room? Yeah. There's a team in St. Louis. Didn't you know that? There's also a team in Kansas City. Okay. So some of those teams do generally pretty well. How well do the players get played? They get like $2,000-3,000 a month, something like that. Yeah. Millions. Whoa, millions of dollars. So even if he was a reasonably successful baseball player, I think the baseline salary for baseball players right now is something like $500,000 a year. That's the minimum that a Major League Baseball player. Now, 2010, it was probably less than that. But at the very least, if he was successful and played for 10 years, he was probably very financially well off. Okay. What did he do after he was a Major League Baseball player? He moved to Miami and did what? He had himself a restaurant. He had a restaurant that was very successful until it burned down. It burned to the ground. Okay. So then his wife said, I want you to move back to Tallahassee so I can be with my family. And I want you to take a job here. How well does he do at this job? Does he make the amount of money that he makes as a Major League Baseball player? Now, what do you all think? Do you think there's a possibility that Phil, being the magnanimous person that he was, might have helped out his relatives when he was really successful? That was one of the pressures that was identified through a little bit of digging in the case, is that he actually was a benefactor to a lot of people in his family. He managed to wean some of them off, but there were a few people he could not actually get off of helping out. So one of those is Freddie. Okay. Another one of those was, I guess, Jerry or Bud was his name. Yeah, depending on, I always saw Bud, but yeah, depending on what you use. So relatives of his wife that he tried to help out. And he's still actually making payments to one of those. If you look at his bank records, he's still actually making regular monthly payments to one of those. The goal of Freddie Fix-It was to say, look, I've helped you out enough, Freddie. I want you to stand on your own 2 feet. And instead, Freddie stood on his own 2 feet until he sat down and watched baseball play. Okay. So yeah, you get down to it, what could you do? What could you do? You could actually go in and see the work that Freddie Fix-It did. And then you could have an independent appraisal of the work done, and you're going to find out that the work that Freddie did was not worth what it was being charged for. So once the independent appraisal is done, you will notice, actually he was paid $8,000 for the painting, not $2,000. I misremembered that number. So they were overpaid by $46,160. Now, can we actually determine that Freddie was had financial benefit in this? Freddie's financial benefit's easy, okay? You go and look at the paychecks that were issued to Freddie and match them to Freddie's bank accounts and say, all right, he got paid for the work and he deposited those checks, financial benefit checked. But are we concerned about Freddie's financial benefit? Is Freddie the fraudster here? Freddie's not really the fraudster of his interest. He probably should not have been given the job, but you know, Freddie is a layabout and he's kind of lazy, but you know, he's not doing anything unethical other than the fact that he probably should be spending more time on his work. Okay. Who's the fraudster in the scenario? Phil and probably Julie. Okay. So how do we actually establish economic impact for this? This is the challenge. This is the challenge that you had to have because you had to establish economic impact. What do we know about Phil's relationship with Freddie before Freddie started doing his fix-it work with CBC? If you do a little bit digging, he was regularly making payments to Freddie for to support him because Freddie actually had no financial support. He was, again, a layabout, didn't actually want to do any work. So Phil, being the successful baseball player, was actually making monthly payments and then took the job at TBC and said, oh, I can't afford to live this lifestyle anymore. Freddie, you're going to have to do some work on your own. It says, okay, does that mean I get to hang out with the baseball players? Okay, I'm trying to imitate you. Like, yeah, that's it. But yeah, I get to hang out with the baseball players. It's like, that's great. I love it. I love it. And so if you could actually do a little bit of digging, you found out that he was making payments to Freddie up until the time he gave him the job. Then you've established he's actually released himself from $1,000 a month of payments that he was making before. Is that an economic benefit? Yes, it certainly is. It certainly is. All right. Concession theft. All right. So what was going on with the concessions? Stuff was being stolen, but what do we know? What was the procedure for being stolen? Is it just, well, you know, Julie would just walk in the concessions and steal a hot dog and then take it home, you know? Is that the concession stuff we're talking about? It's probably a pretty minor concession stuff we're talking about. Or how many thousands of dollars are we talking about here? Let's check and see what we got. I think you're right. $14,678. We have a winner. Gold star for Kyle. All right. So what's happening? What's going on here? We're back to her truck and selling it from her truck, right? Her parents' shop. Yes, it's going to her parents' shop. So yeah, basically at the end of the day, at the end of time, Uncle Phil, yeah. Uncle Phil basically says, you know what, anything that we don't use in concessions, you can go ahead and you can take it to your parents and they can sell it from their concession store, convenience store, okay? Their convenience store. So she basically loads up her truck, she drives it over, and if you did a little bit of digging, you found out, all right, this stuff's going to the convenience store. But could Julie have said, hey, I didn't load up inventory here, I was just loading up like books from my studies at the university, and I was dropping those off to my parents. That was in the back of the truck. Could that be an likely alibi? So you have to prove that this is inventory according to Tallahassee bean counters. What's the easiest way to do that? What's that?
Watch her do it.
Watch her do it. Okay. Yeah, you could subpoena the records for the convenience store. Here's a very interesting thing. If you subpoena the records for the convenience store, you will notice that at the convenience store, the purchases are consistently less than the number of units sold. Now think about this from just a managerial accounting perspective. We can bring in Dr. Otero for an expert if you want, okay? Is it possible to operate as a business where your purchases of an inventory item are consistently less than your sales of an inventory item? Yes, we sell our inventory items multiple times, Dr. Barnes, okay? You know, somebody eats a hamburger, then somebody else eats that same hamburger, you know? That's gross. Yeah, anyway, unless of course they're smoothie hamburgers. I guess that's possible, yeah. But anyway, yeah, so consistently speaking, all of the sales are less than the purchases. What's the only possible explanation for that? Is that they're getting outside sources of inventory that they're not paying for. Okay. And as Kyle pointed out, Total loss of $14,678. Exact number, exact dollar figure. Well done, Kyle. Well done. All right. So what do we have to establish? So we've established the economic impact of the fraud. We've established how the fraud was committed. We have to establish that there was a financial benefit. So again, the concessions, the concession stop, not concession, the convenience store, they actually had a financial benefit. Are they the fraudsters in this scenario? That are external participants and probably knowing participants, and they probably would be sanctioned in this. But who is our fraudster that we identified? Julie. Okay, so Julie had to establish a financial benefit. Can we establish a financial benefit? What's the easiest way to do that? Her bank records. Okay, what happened every single month? What did we choose receiving? $250 from her parents. Okay, her parents say, "Thank you so much for giving these extra concessions. We don't know what we do without it. This is keeping our business afloat. Here's $250 for it." Okay, that's probably what the parents are like. Says, "Oh, they're giving us away for free. Great, we'll take it." Okay, it wasn't like they knew that Julie was committing this heinous fraud with Uncle Phil. At least, but that's what we're going to say. The parents were innocent. The parents were innocent accomplices in this situation, even though Uncle Bud was still receiving $1,000 from Uncle Phil. So, or Father Bud was saying Uncle Phil. All right, last one. What do we got? Construction bid rigging. All right, so how did that occur? What was going on there? We noticed that Larkin Construction swooped in at the very last minute, and they actually managed to underbid everybody else. How would they do that? They're telepathic. They read the minds of every single other bidder, and they said, "Yep, we know what you bid, and we're going to bid lower because we know what that exact dollar amount is." That's because the new Doomsday movie is coming out for Marvel Universe, and Patrick Stewart's going to be in there, Professor X, and so I'm rambling, guys. Help me out here, okay? What could be the explanation? What could be the explanation? Somebody opened the envelopes with the bids. Somebody opened the bids previously. Who probably did that? Give me a hint. He's been involved in some of the frauds that we've already talked about already. Uncle Phil. Yes, Uncle Phil did that. I opened the bids. So he opened the bids and basically underbid. Now, here's the problem with this. Here's the problem. Basically, we've got a construction company that underbid for this particular project. So if they're underbidding, how do we actually determine that there was some sort of financial benefit associated with this? There's got to be more to the fraud than this. Just saying, okay, this company underbid. Obviously, this is unethical, but we're talking about fraud here as opposed to an unethical practice. What was the fraud? So is the amount that the company bid, was that equal to the amount that they received for construction, or they were going to receive for construction? No. So did they receive more or less than what they bid? More, okay. They were issuing change orders on construction for items that were listed there, or they were listed out at one price, and they said, we can't actually afford to do it at this price for certain specific reasons, and we're actually going to need to charge more for this. So even though they got the lowest bid, the eventual amount they received was much greater than what they bid. How much more was it the greater than they bid? What do you guys got a ballpark for me? 106,000. That's a pretty good ballpark, given the actual amounts, $105,777. Yeah, change orders, 3 change orders totaling $105,787. So basically, what happened is that the company underbid. They secured the contract. They went in and said, "All right, these areas that we underbid, we're going to actually manipulate this and say the change orders are necessary to actually meet the quality of work." Now, how do we know that these change orders are fraudulent? Is there a way that we could actually determine that the change order should never have taken place? What do we do with Freddy's Fix-It? How do we know that Freddy's Fix-It was fraudulent? We had an independent appraisal of the work being done. Could we do the same thing for the construction? Yes. What happens if you do that? You get a note from somebody says, yeah, these change orders, they didn't actually change the value of the work being done. They should have stayed straight at the same as the contracted amount. They did not add any additional value. There's no reason for the change in amount. So these were just artificial inflations of value. So that's how we determine it's fraudulent. Okay. All right. Last question before we actually move on to the conclusion here. So what do we have to prove now? So we know that the change orders are fraudulent. Know that it was overbid by $105,000. But again, our fraudster is not the construction company. It's not Larkin Construction. Who's our fraudster? Uncle Phil, okay? How do we prove that Uncle Phil financially benefited from this? How have we been proving it before? Look in the bank accounts. So if we go to Uncle Phil's bank account, then we're going to see payments to Uncle Phil's bank account for some amount of money related to this, right? Is that what we found, everybody? Yeah, okay, we're all done right here. Okay. I'm kind of trapping you in something. That's not what we found. That's not what we found. Uncle Phil's bank account actually has some money that should not be in there, but it has nothing to do with construction. He never received any payments, cash receipts or otherwise from Larkin Construction. So we're kind of at an impasse, right? All right, so what would you speculate? Let's think about this as a class. What would you speculate the next likely approach is? Next most obvious approach. Is there somebody that Uncle Phil could actually have diverted the funds to that might have been able to represent a legal entity in the same household as him? His wife. Okay, so could we look at his wife's bank account? So what do you say? Well, let's look at his wife's bank account. What do you guys think? I'll move quickly forward to page 24 here. All right. So Madeline Harris, she actually has her own business called Harris Catering, which she does pretty well at. But interestingly, on March 13th, she had a cash deposit of $10,000. On September 30th, she had a cash deposit of $52,893.50. They're really weird because those kind of fall outside of the transaction cycle for Harris Catering. So cash deposits of those amounts. So what is the significance of March 13th? Does anybody know? That was the date the bids closed for construction, okay? Does anybody think that's a coincidence? What about the September 30th? That was the date the construction concluded, okay? And so $52,893.50. What do you think I come up with if I multiply $52,893.50? The exact amount of the overstatement and the fraud for the construction. They basically split it 50-50. Now, how do I confirm that these numbers are related to Larkin Construction? Can we actually look at Larkin Construction's bank accounts? If we have legal precedent to do so, if we have legal means to do so, if we think that there's a legal basis for criminal activity, then yes, we can subpoena that. Fortunately, right down here in the corner, Larkin Construction, very interesting. Two notable withdrawals. One $10,000, one $52,893, exactly on the same date that Madeline Harris deposited those. Again, we don't believe in coincidence here. It's kind of obvious that there was something going on here. So yeah, this was kind of a deceitful one. These were kind of ranked in order of less hard to more hard to get to. So again, going back to our original scenario, we talked about the pressure, all right? Phil Akers, yeah, that's his name, isn't it? Phil Akers. Phil Akers, former baseball player. He's been supporting his family for a very, very long time. He now works a job where he makes far less money, but he's still expected to support his family. He's just a superhero. He's trying to support his family, and sometimes superheroes have to commit fraud, right? Okay. He basically was the one running the business. He had the authorization over all the transactions. There was this new revenue recognition project coming up where they were constructing a new stadium, and he could actually benefit at both ends of that. So he actually took advantage of it. His niece, Julie, also had some opportunities that she could help out with the family and do that. So there was definitely opportunity. What's the rationalization here? Let's wrap this up and conclude it. What's the rationalization? So what do we know about Franklin Kennedy? It's an absentee owner. So he's not involved in the organization whatsoever. So feels like I used to be a baseball player, a superstar, and now I'm working as a drudging job for $70,000 a year, $80,000 a year. I deserve more. I do so much for this organization. I bring notoriety as a former baseball player. Blah 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 blah. I'm making stuff up here, but does that all seem legitimate? Yeah. So we actually have our fraud triangle proven. We've got our aspects of the fraud noted, and everybody in this room got every single fraud, right? Yeah. This will be an interesting one if we had a little bit additional time to go into detail on, but hopefully you enjoyed the process. Hopefully you enjoyed the actual activity. This is something I think I'm going to use for, but keep this in mind when we get to evaluations in the semester, because I will be specifically interested as to what you guys thought about this engagement and if there's ways to improve upon it or ways to expand upon it from what we did before. Obviously, it was only worth 15 points, but I think the whole goal here was more the experience than the actual assignment of points. I could assign points on the basis of how many frauds everybody got right. Is that what we want to do on that one? No, okay, all right. All right, we're done here. Have a good day. See you this evening.